The Texas wind howled across the dusty plains, carrying the scent of rain and a deep, aching loneliness. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and sorrow, a woman named Mary Jenkins appeared. She stood at the edge of a rundown ranch, holding a torn letter in a suitcase that had clearly seen better days. Her eyes were red and her hands trembled, but her jaw was set with a quiet, unbreakable determination. It had been 3 years since her husband's death. 3 long years since she'd last been called darling or beautiful. In that time, she hadn't just lost her partner. She'd lost her home, her savings, and even her sense of self-worth. The townspeople whispered behind her back, "Poor Mary. She really let herself go. A fat widow like her will never find work." But Mary had stopped listening. She just needed a chance, a roof over her head, a job, and a reason to keep going. That's what led her to the Lazy Creek Ranch, owned by a man named Luke Carter. He was a cowboy known as much for his silence as for his stubborn pride. They said he'd lost his wife to sickness years ago and had since turned colder than the desert nights. But he was known for being fair, and for Mary, that was reason enough to try. When she arrived, Luke was saddling his horse, his hat tilted low against the setting sun. He barely looked up as she spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Mr. Carter, I heard you need help around the ranch," she said softly. "I can cook, clean, tend to the animals. Anything, really." Luke finally turned, his gray eyes assessing her from head to toe. She was heavy-set, her dress was worn, her shoes covered in dust. But there was something in her eyes, something that hadn't broken. "You ever worked a ranch before?" he asked, his voice gruff. "No, sir," she admitted, "but I'm a fast learner." He hesitated for a moment. "Most folks who come here don't last long." Mary managed a faint smile. "Most folks haven't lost everything, sir." "I have." For a long, heavy moment, the only sound was the wind. Then, with a slow nod, Luke said, "You can start tomorrow." That night, Mary slept in a small cabin behind the main house. It was simple, just a bed, a stove, and a single window butt. To her, it felt like a palace. She cried quietly in the dark, not from sadness, but from the strange, unfamiliar feeling of hope returning after so long. The next few weeks were anything but easy. Work was grueling. She rose before dawn, her body aching from hauling hay and scrubbing floors. She burned her hands cooking over the open fire and nearly fainted one afternoon under the blazing Texas sun. The younger ranch hands would smirk behind her back, whispering about the fat widow who thinks she's a cowboy. But Luke noticed. He saw how she stayed late to prepare the animals' feed without being asked. He saw her learning to mend fences, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw that she never complained, not once. One morning he found her outside, struggling to lift a bucket of water that was nearly her own weight. "Careful, you'll hurt yourself," he said, striding over to help. She wiped sweat from her forehead, her breath coming in short gasps. "No one marries a fat widow, sir," she said quietly, her voice full of a weary resignation. "But I can work." Luke froze. Her words hit him harder than a winter storm. For years he'd buried his heart beneath a mountain of loss. But there was something about her raw honesty, her quiet pain, that chipped away at the ice around his soul. He took the heavy bucket from her hands and set it down gently. "Maybe," he said slowly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You don't need to prove you can work, Mary. Maybe you just need someone to see you." She blinked, startled by his words. "See me?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Not what you've lost. Not your size, just—" Mary quickly turned away, her throat tightening. No one had spoken to her with such kindness in years. She didn't know whether to cry or to run. But Luke didn't press her. He simply tipped his hat and walked back to the barn, leaving her with tears that, for the first time, felt like healing. Over the following months, their lives began to weave together. She cooked his meals, and he taught her how to ride a horse. He fixed the leaky roof on her cabin. She mended his torn shirts. Slowly, laughter started to return to the ranch, soft at first, like the first whisper of spring after a long, hard winter. Then, one evening, a fierce storm rolled in over the hills. Thunder cracked like a whip, and in the chaos, the cattle broke through a fence. Luke rushed out into the driving rain to round them up. Terrified for him, Mary grabbed a lantern and followed, ignoring his orders to stay inside. She found him in the mud, struggling to lead a frightened horse back to safety. Without a second thought, she waded through the downpour and helped him pull the rope out, her dress soaked and her hair plastered to her face. Out. When they finally got the animals secured, she collapsed beside him, laughing and crying all at once from relief and exhaustion. "Out! You're out of your mind," Luke said, catching his breath. She smiled through the rain. "So are you. But someone had to keep you alive." And then, for the first time in years, Luke laughed a deep, genuine laugh that echoed across the ranch like a promise. After that night, things changed. The workers stopped whispering. They began to respect her not for her appearance, but for her courage and her grit. And Luke began to notice things he hadn't before. The way her eyes softened when she smiled, the warmth in her voice, the incredible strength in her heart. One morning, as the sun rose over the golden fields, he found her standing by the corral, feeding the horses. He approached her quietly and said, "You know, Mary, you were wrong." She turned, a puzzled look on her face. "About what?" He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "About what you said that first day." She frowned, trying to remember. "You mean, no one marries a fat widow?" He nodded. "Because someone does." Mary's breath caught in her throat. "Luke." He took off his hat and stepped closer, his gaze steady and full of an emotion she'd never expected to see again. "You've mended more than just this ranch. Mary, you've mended me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but for the first time, she didn't hide her face. She didn't try to conceal her scars or the softness of her body. She stood tall, radiant in her truth. When he kissed her, it wasn't out of pity or loneliness. It was out of a love that was deep, quiet, and real. Years later, the folks in town would say that the Carter Ranch had never looked so alive. Flowers bloomed where weeds once grew. Laughter filled the air, and people swore that even the horses seemed happier. And every time someone mentioned the fat widow who found work, Luke would just grin and say, "No, she didn't. Just find work, she found a home." Because beauty isn't about what the mirror shows. It's about the heart that keeps going when the world turns its back. And love doesn't look for perfection. It finds strength in our imperfections and turns them into something beautiful and eternal. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more stories that inspire. We'll see you in the next one.